Hello, and welcome to The Theorist's Handbook. My name is David Stockdale. This is a relatively new series on my channel where I talk about various topics related to critical analysis. On June 10th, 2007, one of the most controversial episodes in television history aired.
It's not TV, it's HBO.
Oh, excuse me then. I'm speaking, of course, about The Sopranos series finale. The episode in question, titled Made in America, was written and directed by showrunner David Chase. Now, if you're not aware, The Sopranos is a show about a New Jersey mafia boss, Tony Soprano, and his family. Throughout the latter few seasons of the show, a series of gradually escalating conflicts occur between the New Jersey-based DeMeo crime family, led by Tony Soprano, and the New York-based Lubertazzi crime family, led by Phil Leotardo. This culminates in an all-out war between the two families, resulting in the death of Bobby Bacala, as well as the hospitalization and likely death of Tony's consigliere, Silvio Dante. In the very last episode, Tony meets with a few disgruntled underlings from New York, and they arrange for Phil to be murdered. Subsequently, Phil is shot dead right in front of his wife at a gas station. And then Phil's head is crushed by his own car. Not a great way to go. Anyway, in the final scene, Tony and his family all meet up at a diner. Tony puts on the song Don't Stop Believing by Journey, and just as Tony looks up to see his daughter entering the restaurant, the screen cuts to black. And well, that's it. That's how it ended. You know, I remember watching this when it aired and checking my TV to see if the cable went out or something like that. Since its airing in 2007, the closing scene of this episode has been the subject of much debate. What did the cut to black mean exactly? There are a few schools of thought on the matter, and I'm not going to lay them all out here, but I do want to discuss a few possibilities. The first possibility is that, Tony and his family just went on with their night. Another considerably darker possibility is that Tony was killed right in that there diner, right in front of his family, perhaps in retaliation for his part in Phil Leotardo's murder. Thus, the cut to black signifies Tony's death, the end of his conscious existence. This is the interpretation I prefer. If you ask me, there's a very good case to be made that this ending was not all that ambiguous, if, that is, you were paying attention over the course of the series. In fact, there's a moment in an earlier episode from the last season titled Sopranos Home Movies that would seem to foreshadow this very moment. But I'll be the first to admit it's debatable, and I'm not here to argue about the ending of The Sopranos. I actually want to use it as a case study for the issue at hand. At various points in time since the last episode aired, creator David Chase has said a number of things about the ending, and to his credit, Chase has never fully explained the meaning of that particular scene. In fact, he initially said, "I have no interest in explaining, defending, reinterpreting, or adding to what is there." Nonetheless, Chase has made a number of subsequent statements that would seem to have implications in this regard. Here he is in an interview from the Directors Guild of America. Quote, "I thought the possibility would go through a lot of people's minds, or maybe everybody's mind, that he was killed. Whether this is the end here or not, it's going to come at some point for the rest of us. Hopefully, we're not going to get shot by some rival gang mob or anything like that. I'm not saying that, but obviously he stood more of a chance of getting shot by a rival gang mob than you or I do, because he put himself in that situation. All I know is the end is coming for all of us." Now, at a certain point during this interview, Chase says that he actually planned out the entire final scene to go along with the now infamous Journey song, Don't Stop Believing. Later in the same interview, Chase states as follows, "The biggest feeling I was going for, honestly, was don't stop believing. It was very simple and much more on the nose than people think. That's what I wanted people to believe, that life ends and death comes, but don't stop believing. There are attachments we make in life, even though it's all going to come to an end, that are worth so much, and we're so lucky to have been able to experience them. Life is short. Either it ends here for Tony or some other time. But in spite of that, it's really worth it. So don't stop believing."
Don't stop believing.
Okay, So I would say this is perhaps a good example of a creator who is giving away too much with respect to their own understanding of the work. On a related note, this is one of the reasons I like David Lynch so much. Look at how he responds to a question about his work.
Really liked Eraserhead. Believe it or not, Eraserhead is my most spiritual film.
Why elaborate on that?
No, I won't. No one sees it that way, or maybe somebody out there does, but it is.
See, this guy gets it. And, you know, Chase is entirely free to say whatever he wants. But the point here is that we shouldn't let Chase dictate the meaning of The Sopranos merely by virtue of his status as the writer and director of this episode, or indeed his status as the showrunner of the series. The very fact that every time Chase comments on the ending, it inevitably makes headlines. This is evidence that the so-called showrunner has become an established and significant position, similar to that of the author with a capital A, which has emerged over the history of literature. Like the capital A author, the director or showrunner is in a position from which meaning is commonly thought to be disseminated and is therefore a position of authority. To put it plainly, I don't think this is a good thing. I get a fair amount of comments on any given work that I cover that state loosely as follows. Interesting, but I don't think that's what the creator intended. So I think it's worth noting here that comments along these lines tend not to be very helpful or productive in terms of promoting further discussion. I mean, really, I think speculating about the creator's intentions is a total dead end. Why? Well, primarily the idea that one can have an intimate sort of knowledge of the creator's intent is specious at best. I mean, we're not in their head. We can't really know what the creator is thinking. And it's fairly easy to fall into this mindset from time to time. But perhaps more to the point, why should the author's intent inform our own understanding of the work? Why should the author be allowed to dictate the overall meaning of the work, philosophically speaking? The simple answer is they shouldn't. This is all the more clear with respect to works that entail a high level of collaboration, like films and TV shows, which tend to involve a large number of people performing various creative and logistical functions. In this installment, I will be discussing the death of the author, as well as its implications for art in the digital age. The Death of the Author is an essay written by French literary theorist Roland Barthes. I strongly encourage you to go ahead and read this essay if you have a chance. There will be a link to it in the video description. Barthes argued against what was a fairly common practice in his day, that is, the tendency to use an author's biographical information to inform the meaning of the work. Now, challenging this practice wasn't exactly a new idea at the time. Theorists in the school of New Criticism previously conceived of the intentional fallacy, the idea that an author's intentions were irrelevant to a work's meaning. But Barthes takes it a bit further than the New Critics. Barthes asserted that the concept of the author was a product of a certain ideology, specifically capitalist ideology. He argued that while storytellers of the past were thought of as talented for their performative abilities, they weren't credited for being the origin of the story itself, nor were they credited for their genius abilities as some authors are today. What Barthes takes issue with, I would say, is the sort of personality cult that centers around authors and the weight it gives to their comments. In this essay, Barthes said, "We know now that a text is not a line of words releasing a single theological meaning, the message of the author God, but a multi-dimensional space in which a variety of writings, none of them original, blend and clash. The text is a tissue of quotations drawn from innumerable centers of culture." It might be helpful in this context to think of a work of literature as a word collage of sorts, a kind of mishmash of words from various sources. Now, there might be a common theme to these words, and their arrangement might be quite clever, but there is no sense in which this supposed author is the source, strictly speaking, of the words themselves. In this same vein, we might think of a television show or a film as a visual collage. Barthes thought it was the reader who constructed meaning out of a text. In this essay, he says, "The reader is the space on which all quotations that make up a writing are inscribed without any of them being lost. A text's unity lies not in its origin, but in its destination." He also took issue with the idea that there can be what he calls a final reading, a definitive interpretation of a work. And I've parroted this idea at various points throughout my videos. Barthes argued that assigning a text a singular sort of be-all, end-all meaning would necessarily impose a limit on that text. I would argue that the same is true of films or other works in the visual realm. It is the reader and the viewer who construct meaning out of a work. To demonstrate this point, let's do a little thought experiment. Okay, so we know how the final scene of The Sopranos played out. Let's say, for instance, that David Chase woke up tomorrow morning and announced that the ending of the series, that final cut to black, essentially signified Tony's death. He's dead. So, is that the definitive interpretation now? Whenever somebody says, "Oh, I think Tony lived," can you point towards David Chase saying this and say, "Nope, you're wrong"? You can see how this might lead to some fairly confounding results. What if the very next day Chase changed his mind and said, "Nope, Tony's alive, he's retired and living in Boca Raton, Florida now"? What if Chase said the entire series was one of Tony's fever dreams? Is that the definitive interpretation of the whole series now? Or rather, is it that merely by virtue of the showrunner having said it? I don't think so. It is the reader, or in this case, the viewer, who constructs meaning out of a work. Once the work is out there, the creator's part is essentially done. They might have some interesting things to say about it, but once it's out there, their perspective should not shape our understanding merely because they had a part in its construction. Now, I should take a second to point out that the creator may well have an important point to make after their work is out there, but we should evaluate their ideas based on those claims, not the mere fact that they have created the work, if that makes any sense. Okay, so here's a bit of a curveball. Let's say that tomorrow, Chase announces that there's gonna be a Sopranos movie that takes place chronologically after the events of the series finale, and it will feature the character Tony Soprano. Let's assume, for the sake of this thought experiment, the untimely death of James Gandolfini is not a factor. Wouldn't the existence of this new work inform our understanding of the series finale? Wouldn't it mean definitively that Tony wasn't killed? Well, this sort of post hoc interpretation of the initial work would be entirely contingent upon the viewer's acceptance of the sequel's premise, i.e., that Tony lived to see another day, and furthermore, that this new work depicts events that take place after the episode in question. Or at the very least, the viewer's experience of the film will necessarily be mitigated by their understanding of the series finale. If, for instance, they previously believed the protagonist had died, it would then be required of them to suspend their disbelief in order to watch the film. Nevertheless, it's still the case that the viewer is supplying their own interpretation. They might well reject this new work outright. I mean, a lot of Godfather fans hate Part 3 so much that they don't even consider it part of the series. Whatever the case, the meaning is determined by the viewer. As you might imagine, Barthes wasn't too fond of the word author, at least not with respect to its usage in relation to a text. He thought it gave an unjustified sort of weight to the author's perspective, a sort of authority, which leads to this notion of an all-knowing author god. Barthes suggested that perhaps we think of the author rather as a scripter, the person who assembles a text, not this divine being who conjures its existence up out of nothingness. Now, the term scripter hasn't quite caught on, but I do share Barthes' inclination to think of authors in this way. I would go even further to say that we should think of all creators in this way. It's been over 50 years since Barthes' essay was published. Even now, a creator's comments about their work tend to hold a certain weight with people, but we might be seeing the emergence of a new paradigm on the horizon. When it comes to Petscop, for instance, the personality of the creator or creators is an object of mystery. The absence of a creator lends an air of uncertainty to the work itself. I have to say, I might even be a bit disappointed if they ever revealed themselves, because it would kind of do away with that sense of mystery. We can recognize that an author or creator is still alive if that's the case. We can recognize that they have experiences and opinions that are related to the work they've had a part in making. We can even assume that these experiences and opinions have informed, in some sense, the creator's understanding of their own work. We can recognize all of this and still understand that their view of the work doesn't necessarily have to conform with our own respective ideas about the work. There's nothing contradictory about that. So, in summation, when it comes to the interpretation of an artistic work, don't defer to the creator for answers. Their part in the work was essentially done the second they put it out there. Tell me what you think it means. That wraps it up for this installment of The Theorist's Handbook. If you enjoy my videos and have a few bucks to spare, please consider supporting me on Ko-fi.com/Nightmare Masterclass. Please know that any donation, large or small, is highly appreciated. Thank you for watching, and good night.